assessment tools that the students can use. We actually asked our students. We got a reply from 4,800 students about their use of AI, and yes, the majority of them are using it. By now, they are using it in very sophisticated and differentiated ways. Primaries, of course, language tasks, having something translated, having something summarized for them, fixing the grammar on something, fixing the spelling on something, just the normal things. It's extensively used for coding tasks. Specify what a particular function should do, and it just spews out the Python code, or it produces the R code or the LaTeX. Many of the students have mentioned LaTeX. They're using that all the time, but are not necessarily proficient in it. It can help them get correct LaTeX going. They're using it to prepare for their exams. So they're feeding lecture scripts into the tool and then ask the tool to generate assessments for them, self-test assessments for them. So that actually seems to be working quite well for them. And yes, they also have a very good feel about what to trust and not to trust, even up to the level where it says, you know, if life gives you lemons, make lemonade. They say the answers are always extremely convincing, and that's good, even if they're wrong, because I learned something if I disprove GPT. I thought that was an interesting use. And they use it as a study buddy, because they say I can ask the questions that I think are dumb, and the GPT won't judge me for what I think are dumb questions. They probably aren't really dumb questions, but it won't judge me. And it also won't be mad at me if I don't take its advice. Other people are. So that's another use, a non-judgmental study buddy.
Thank you, Gerd. Yeah, we heard from you that that students are using it to study for the exams. Maybe you want to continue like right on that. How does it? In which way does it influence and matter for students? Is it like changing the way of how they are studying in a big way, or is it just studying now with AI, or what do you see there in a difference?
So some students come from very technical high schools, other students come from a different background. It can help them overcome some of those differences by taking the same piece of text and having it explained to them at different levels. So actually the thing can summarize things very well, but it can also elaborate on things. So to just get a more customized learning experience for some of them is a matter of inclusion. It also can help with some students who have disabilities, students who are hearing impaired. It automatically gives the transcripts. Yes, that's also AI. It can help for visual students for visual impairments, that they can read the formulas to them like you'd read them to somebody else. So it could be leveling the playing field a little bit if it's used the right way.
Does anyone of you have like additions to that?
Well, I think there's two issues that I'd like to quickly pick up on. So a colleague of mine who's doing research in software engineering said there are numerous studies about how software engineers use AI support, like Copilot and tools like that. One of the reasons why software engineers are a good model is they're the knowledge workers today, where the knowledge workers of other domains will be tomorrow. You know, it's like a lead user, a very good example. And one of the reasons why this is the case is because they can build their own tools. They kind of eat their own dog food and improve it upon it. And one thing we apparently found out about software engineers, or so my colleague tells me, is that, you know, expert programmers don't get a large proficiency boost, but intermediate and less expert programmers actually get quite an efficiency boost by using these tools, which would kind of coincide with what you just mentioned, Gerd, that, you know, it may help to raise people up to a certain level. Having said this, I think we need to think about two issues. The one is, I read very early on that many of these tools, when they generate codes, they do generate code based on codes that they have read. And some of this code has security problems. So the code that's generated by these things may have security problems as well. So you should never forget the stuff was trained on examples. If the examples are not very good, what it generates is problematic. So yeah, it will raise you to a certain level, but you also have to make sure that you're not shooting your own foot using it. And last but not least, we're in the very happy case that we can afford equip our student with these tools. It may actually open up certain disparities between societies where we can afford these tools and societies where we cannot afford these tools. And that's one thing that we need to think about. Having said this, it may be cheaper to give people access to some of these tools than send a lot of professors somewhere physically and have them teach. So there are these trade-offs that we need to think about. Whom does it benefit? How does it benefit them? And how does it help them to raise the learning curve?
One quick one, I would like to also comment on your first limitation about being not knowing where the source is from and being able to replicate by accident some errors. I think it was also the case before with different models, like just taking examples online. Like when I was learning, when I questioned the first step was just asking Google. Now people are asking ChatGPT, but the result is then the same, a piece of code that we take and move. So I wonder how much the impact have changed, or if it's more like the magnitude in terms that before it was maybe like small snippet, it was maybe like rarer, and now it might be more common.
Sorry,
That's
okay.
totally okay.
So I think what you see here is something that you often see, in any kind of digital transformation. At the first level, you're substituting certain things. Then because it becomes cheaper, you increase the usage of that tool. That's what we're seeing now. We're seeing the increase. Before you looked up code in books. Now you looked up code in Google. Now you can have it being generated. So you use more and more of this. And the third level, and I think that's the one that's going to become very interesting, is what is the, it changes the way things are actually being done and coordinated, right? So it changes how, students work with each other, how students, use a study buddy, etc. And it kind of changes the dynamic of the learning environment. And I think that is the part that we may want to reflect on most, because everything else is like, how are students going to learn today, tomorrow, maybe in half a year? Whereas, academic institutions should really think also about how does the university look like in 5 years to 10 years or 20 years, or even non-academic institutions. Changing schools is a very, very time-consuming and slow process. So actually thinking about how is learning going to change profoundly, and what skills will people need then, and what skills will the instructors need is a huge question.
Yeah, maybe I can come up on this because I just wanted to say it's actually, you said the learning environment is changing, but also the teaching environment, if you want to call it like this. So we say, yeah, we give them the tools, access to the tools, but that's not enough, because not everyone knows how to use the tool in a good way. So that's one point, how to teach to the students which is the best way to use it, the fruitfulest way. But on the same time, we have to take also our faculty, our teachers, and teach them how they can integrate in the best way those tools, and how that will change probably their teaching also. Which material, what do I want, what skills do I want, as we said, for our students at the end. And I have to see, okay, how can I teach those skills? And maybe there are other skills that I don't need to teach anymore because AI will do it for me. And also, how can I use those tools for my teaching? So also as a teacher, as a faculty, I can use the tools to help me create a curricula, help me to create an exam. Maybe also if the students want a mock exam, like the exam I do before I have the real exam, I just can create it with my AI as a teacher, or students can do it by themselves. So we have a lot of opportunities also for the teachers, and we have to change that way as well.
Thank you, Edna. Yeah, staying on that a little bit longer, we heard about the exams and also preparing exams. And also with an exam always comes like the evaluation of an exam. How does the use of AI affect evaluations of exams? I'm sure there are lots of impacts, but just to get some ideas.
Yeah, we have maybe different directions. You have some faculties that say, now I go back only to paper and pencil in the dark room. There is no internet and nothing else. That might be possible if you have only 20 students and you can then go and evaluate it. If you have 200 students, we have heard, then you need the AI to evaluate the exam, because the AI first has to read the handwritten exam and then evaluate it and help you with it. That's one direction we can go. We have read, maybe all of you, about the university in Vienna, one I think, and in Prague, that said we don't want any bachelor thesis anymore. So only a discussion, a group discussion, I think is the solution there. So there you might have some faculties going back more to oral exams. But again, if we have a class with 200 students, that might be quite an effort to have 200 oral exams. That means we need to rethink really our modalities of examination. What do we want to examine? We don't need to have like an exam after every single class, after every single course. Maybe it's broader. And also how to integrate AI. I mean, if it is a tool I can use during the whole semester, I need to be able to use it also during the exam. Otherwise, why am I teaching it the way with the use? So that's the constructing alignment. I have to have to know what I want, which skills I want at the end. How do I teach them? And then how do I examine exactly those skills that I want and not something else?
I think for many disciplines, this is an opportunity to just have a close, fresh look at their curriculum. I mean, you start out, you have pocket calculators. Now, what does that mean about, do I need to learn how to do a square root by hand? You got the internet. Now I don't need less encyclopedic knowledge anymore in my head. Now you have different generative AI tools. It's yet another level. Every time I think it's a discipline, you have to decide again, what are the things that my students need to know just like that, on the back of their head, on the tip of their tongue? What are the things that they need to be able to do? And those I might have to test with paper and pencil or an oral exam, depending on scalability things. And then there's the question, what problems do they need to solve in real life, in the job, in society? And that's maybe a part of an exam where the world is your oyster, where everything is open. You will have very, very hard questions that require creativity, that require very good use of the tools at your disposal, because you also have limited time. But you might have to have two-part exams, one of them in paper and pencil or oral, another part of the exam. You can use anything except maybe your fellow student, but as we just heard, maybe even that one is not a requirement anymore. But I'm a physicist. There are some things I just have to know. I have to know what is a force, what's an energy, what's a momentum. Otherwise, I can't talk with other people. So there are some things that I can't leave to ChatGPT. I just have to know what those terms mean.
Any thoughts on that?
Also, like talking about the evaluation, AI can also provide some opportunities to have more continuous examination. Instead of waiting for the very end to do like one big exam, you can have like smaller quizzes for like students. They can try as many times as they want to like own their skills on specific topics. So that's something which was not available before, and that actually now becomes more available to teachers and to students. That's also some of the opportunities that are coming with these technologies today. So also, yeah, lots of things that we have to change. I think it's a very good point trying to rethink what we want to teach, the way we want to teach, how we want to evaluate it. And that's probably a right moment to do it now.
It's maybe the time to bring my favorite quote. Marshall McLuhan said, every augmentation is an amputation. So whenever you have a tool at your disposal, you amputate some capabilities. I would argue nobody in this room and nobody in this Zoom, this even rhymes, can go to the woods and when it's wet and light the fire just like that, without matches, etc. Civilization has continued, even though we've lost that capability. And, you know, to pick up on Gerd's statement especially is like, I think this is a call to arms to disciplines to reinvestigate which things that for millennia we taught our students, or years or decades, whatever, can we amputate at this point? Which skills don't they need to know anymore? And that's very painful. You know, many disciplines have relied on the essay as the major way to evaluate, can the students think in the context of this discipline? And maybe that is not the best way to do this evaluation anymore. I'm not the right person to argue what the right way is, but I know like a bachelor thesis in computer science, which I teach, is very different than a pure literature study of going out and formulating your thoughts. We actually make them develop new things, do new things, etc., where they run experiments, etc. That is still more difficult to generate with an AI, and therefore I don't think it should go away in my discipline, but I cannot argue so for other disciplines. What I want to point out in this case, it might be that we teach people things not because they need to know those skills in industry, because they help their cognitive development, right? We teach students in first grade to write with their hands. That helps them to develop their cognitive motory skills, maybe their brain development, etc. That's a good thing, even though very few people write a lot by hand. Even people taking notes in this room do so mostly by typing. I say mostly. What do we have? About a 2/3 to 1/3 distribution here. This may be different if you would come into my class of first term ones, where most people have their computers open or their tablets and at least take handwritten notes on their tablets. But I think this is an onus to us. We need to revisit our disciplines and do so with a long-term basis. It's not about 3 years. It's about 5, 10, 20 years that we need to rethink these skills necessary and what we need to teach them and what we don't need to teach them.
Yeah, maybe one point coming from sociolinguistics. So I had to write a lot during my study time. You can use those tools as well if it is an conscious use and with critical thinking. You might like do a first draft of something just without AI. Do again, second one with the help of the AI, and then do a third one revisiting what AI gave you. And if you have that experience, you still see, okay, which part is wrong about, or where is AI wrong maybe, but at the same time, you improve also your language skills because you have the example from the AI that might be better. And so the next time, if you write on your own, you already write better than before because you learned by interacting with the AI. So it's not everything just bad, also with all those writings. And I think we have to approach it also in that way and teach it in that way and give those experiences, explicit experience to the students as well.
Let me pick up on that and place another one of my favorite quotes. Carl Weick wrote in one of his books, I think interviewing another scientist, how do I know what I think before I see what I say? The act of writing or of speaking is an extremely important act of thinking because it forces you to linearize your thoughts and make them more or less clearly understandable. Now, please, I don't want to be quoted ever saying I think writing has passed its use, because it's extremely useful and it's an extremely important part of the thought process. It forces you to clean, and then you read it and you go, oh my God. Right. So this kind of set of cycle, which, however, can now get reinforced by an additional critic. It's not just you and not just your colleagues, but it is an AI that helps you critic this and improve this thought cycle. Right. So and yeah, it's not as judgmental as my colleagues is a very important thing. It also helps us in all parts of our life to externalize things and look at them, step back. So I think writing is an important skill, formulating your thoughts, but it may not be that just looking at the end result is a good way of qualifying how good can somebody think.
And I respond on here, which can be also interesting, is how we can have also use of a language model or other technique to stimulate creativity, like having some sort of like brainstorming partners, because that forces you to verbalize your thoughts. And so that way, in addition to producing some exam at the end, you can also use it to try to put words on what you are thinking, seeing if it makes sense. You might potentially just disregard all the answers from the AI, but like just forcing you in this process, like dialogue, if you don't have someone to talk to right now. That also can be a use of AI.
I think you're touching upon a very important point. Namely, how can we use these tools to actually make us more creative and look at more different possibilities? You know, Herb Simon, who later won the Nobel Prize in economics, kind of said that, you know, intelligence has a number of phases. The first phase is understanding what the problem is. The second one is designing a variety of solutions. We spent most of our time coming up with the first solution and then refining that, just because it was so much effort dealing with that first solution and designing that first solution. I think some of these tools are actually very good at quickly sketching a whole design space of possible solutions. Even if you look at, you know, creative people, they do that. They have many, many sketchboards. And these tools may help us to explore the design space of solutions much faster before we then say, now, this is the solution that I'm actually going to use. So kind of this trade-off suddenly becomes a trade-off. So I think in creative thinking, these tools can be extremely helpful.
I wanted just to touch on another point that you said. We can use the tool if I don't have a sparring partner or I have someone else. But I think that's one point that shows us that we also have to rethink and use our social skills, right? So to not say, okay, everybody can stay at home and just do everything with our AI. We don't need each other anymore, but we really have to rethink, okay, and what can we do and what can we do best together, we as human beings, with the help, yes, of AI along with it, but also to really use efficiently. Exactly the point where we come together and maybe discuss also with each other what AI gave us as an opportunity, as an answer, as a possibility, and then to go further in society.
Thank you. We don't have much time left, but I would like to open now the discussion to the public. You on Zoom, you can write your questions in the chat, and they will be read if there are any questions in the chat, and also you in the room, you can ask your questions now.
Yes, thank you very much for the discussions far. It was said before, these tools generate output based on what they are fed with. So they generate output based on input, right? How do you assess the danger of information bias and by extension educational bias and by extension scientific bias based on that mechanism?
I mean, we never know what some of these big commercial models have been trained on. So to directly go back to the source, there's just no way. It's proprietary what has been the corpus for developing these models. One thing that we would like to do is tune our own model, or even maybe in the far future, even train our own model from scratch and essentially use the lecture materials from our universities to train it. Then we know what's in there. Is it going to make it bias-free? Certainly not. Is a university bias-free? No, it isn't either, because it's a bunch of individuals that come together, each one with their individual biases. But at least we make it more reproducible where the statements would be coming from. So yes, we go in different steps, increasingly trying to use our own materials in these large language models.
Maybe I can also comment on it. I think the discussion of biased decision makers and biased AI is a long one, and it predates by quite a bit the the newest wave of AI tools and their usage. And there have been long discussions, whole conferences being sprung up, whole scientific subfields about how can they be treated and how can they not be treated. In all of this, I think what Gerd says is an extremely important point. We humans are all biased as well, you know, in some way. And our hope should be to have people come to our institutions and have them, you know, learn from different sources and different people and find their own way around these sources. I think it is important to be able, therefore, to go back to the sources and see, why did you come to this conclusion? Because if a student asks me, why did you come to this conclusion? You know, I can come up with an answer as to why I came to this conclusion. Whether it is the reason why I was originally thinking about the statement is something that I will delegate to psychologists to determine, and I will avoid answering myself. However, there is this discourse that I think is at the core of academia. And what we need to do is develop AIs that can engage in this discourse. And there is research in how to actually take a combination of both, you know, statistics-based AI, such as LLMs, etc., and deductive logic-based AI, and how you can combine them in something called neurosymbolic AI, where you use the first part to essentially come up with an answer, and then you take the second part, trying to see what the properties of these answers are, whether they're correct, incorrect, whether they may have bias or not bias, and therefore try and reduce the, you know, wrongful, biased, whatever answer that you have. You know, this is an active research area, and, you know, expect to come output, but is that going to be bias-free? No, because the knowledge base underlying it is biased, right? So I don't think you're going to get something that is bias-free, because I frankly don't believe there is such a thing as bias-free data. All these and have their cultural biases in there. So, yeah.
I think being aware of it is one big step we all have to be, and foster that awareness that the bias is there, as it is in the real life all the time.
And also, it's also another point to really keep in mind when we're interacting with these systems is that we need to keep a very critical way of taking the answers, regardless, like regarding bias, regarding correctness, and lots of other things. I think that's something we need to teach students, but I think also learning it by themselves. That we should not take the answers of the system are just like truth. And I think this is something that people are learning relatively quickly when they interact enough with the systems. But when they don't, it's hard to know.
Thank you very much. The next question. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Maybe also coming back to the cultural bias. So you said one method to make it more equitable would be to make the AI accessible to countries, let's say of the global south, which are less digitalized. But this also wouldn't this be another introduction of Western thinking into the global south? Or is there any attempts of like bringing people to generate their own AI system with like their own cultural bias maybe? Or what are attempts to make this more equal?
I cannot answer this about about the kind of AI you're thinking about. I've had the honor and pleasure to work with one of my graduate students where we built systems that automatically adapt the user interface to the cultural background of the user. I mean, this may sound odd to you, living in a Western world, but colors actually convey meaning, and those meanings in the colors are not universally true. The way we structure knowledge is, for example, much more hierarchical in the global north than in the global south. The way we structure knowledge, the way we structure many things. So we built systems that automatically adapted the user interface of a to-do list application to the cultural background, and we found people were faster using it, were making less mistakes, we're happier using it, and all the good things that you associate with it. So yes, we need to make our AIs culturally aware, and yes, we may need to empower people in other parts of the world to train with their own data. Hopefully they have the data to train it with is something, you know, I mean, we're living in a world where I don't know what percentage of the training material is English. You know, we're lucky that we're predominantly in languages that there is other training material around, but that's definitely not the case in the whole world. So that's why I say I think we're opening ourselves up to new problems by introducing these tools.
Any additions to that?
Yeah. I have two questions from Zoom. The first one is a very general one. Do you think that the child's way of learning is a good model to train AI to learn?
I'm happy to start and probably be wrong. But like, I think AI is a very different way of, like first, the structure is very different from a human structure. And like the way to interact with the world is very different. Typically, we have a single body. In robotics, we can have 1,000 robots learning together on same problems. And so it means that there are like very strong differences in the way these systems could be learning, even if we are talking about like learning from experiences. And then there are data sets. Humans don't really learn by data sets. They might learn by reading books, they might learn by talking to people, but typically AIs are being trained on very large data sets. That's a very structurally different ways of like let's say optimizing, because in this sense for AI, it's much like optimizing some functions. But I do think there are very interesting ways that we can learn from human development. And this could be impacting the way we interact, and we could teach AI in some applications. So I would not say we should just treat them as two totally different things, but we should try to see what we can learn from one to transfer to the other, even if they are very different.
I just see there's a very big danger in mixing up artificial intelligence with humans. I mean, these are probabilistic models or deterministic, depending on how you build them, but these are still just algorithms. They don't have agency. They can't play. So, I mean, all of these comparisons to humans, I actually hate that the whole thing is called artificial intelligence. There's no intelligence here. It doesn't actively go out and pursue knowledge. I mean, all of us, we go out, we want to get new knowledge, we have agency, we say, oh yeah, let's read up on this, I'm curious about that. The thing will never learn that way. It's basically having documents forced down its throat, and then it adjusts its little internal weights according to them. So there's just a huge difference between a machine and an algorithm and a human, and I don't think that difference will really go away. It will look like a human, it will kind of talk like a human, but it is just something completely different.
Okay, so no addition to that. You said there was a second question.
It was asked, the currently most popular tools are developed by large tech companies covering general purposes. Would it make sense to develop specific tools focused on teaching and learning? And if so, what features would they need on top?
I mean, there are some tools, or better say also extensions developed to where the tools are trained on materials from teaching for the teachers. And we also have one research program project right now at the University of Bern, actually two, where they, in one, they are developing, probably at the end it will be kind of a chatbot where the faculty can ask any question about how can I structure my lecture best for this and that subject, and the chatbot should give you the best answer. And the other one is a project where you have podcasts and the AI will generate automatically some questions so that you can interact as a student better with the podcast and learn from it, not just look the podcast, but also have some questions about it. And then if you give an answer, it will also tell you if it was right or wrong. so there are already things developed, and I think also at ETH you said you are developing.
Yeah, I mean, the tools at ETH are slightly different. They're just based on our lecture materials. So they do something called retrieval augmentation, where you use the lecture scripts and then use those as a reference material. There's tuning, there's training. But essentially what we try to do there is adjust the answers better to the level that we teach at, and also make it overall more trustworthy, because that was something that the students had been asking for. They said, you know, more facts, less hallucinations. There are, of course, whole other research realms trying to make a system like that act like a Socratic teacher. Don't just answer the question, ask the next question, like you would teach another student. I think that's great. Personally, I'm a little bit worried about that. The students in the end vote with their mouse, and they might just access the model that gives them the answer right away and not use the Socratic tool. But that's more me like being a little bit the pragmatist or cynic or whatever you want to call it about what students might do if they just want an answer. They don't want another question, they want an answer. I notice that all the time when I try to teach Socratically.
Thank you very much. Is there one question left? Okay. I mean, we have 3 minutes, maybe.
Very concrete, also with ethical question. What do you think of Google's attempt to manipulate Gemini to reduce its bias by using a process called prompt transformation that secretly corrects the user's instruction to improve the responses generated by the model?
Like, I'm happy to at least contextualize the question. So like what happened was very recently there was some outcry because to try to address diversity from a male white programmer, say like typical Google, like I think they're not the only one, decided to use a prompt of people and add a Chinese person or like an Asian looking person, a black person and so on in the image generation. And so it happened. Like one of the very famous cases was trying to draw the picture of a Nazi officer in Second World War. And so you had, let's say, racially diverse Nazi officers. And that was an example of very bad attempt at trying to do diversity without really thinking about it properly. I think it's bad. I don't have much to say about it.
I'm going to be very careful about how I word this. I think diversity is a very complex topic, which we often think is very simple, but it's actually very complex. And I will address it in a domain where I know much more about. If you look at news diversity and the kind of diversity you would want in news, it is a big question. What kind of news diversity do we actually want? And when you go to the root of this question, you realize that the real question you're asking is, what is your theory of democracy? If you want a liberal democracy, then you should give people as much as news as possible, optimize towards their own need. If you want a discourse-based democracy, you should offer them as many views. If you want a critical democracy, you should give them as many news stories that are critical of the previously read. So suddenly you're in a completely different domain. So I think diversity is a very complex issue that cannot be simply attained by saying, oh, I just want a Gini factor of X on my distribution. It is a complex social constructs that we need to be very careful about we operationalize it.
Thank you very much. With that, I have to end the discussion. I think in conclusion, we can all say that AI will stay a relevant topic for surely the next 5 to 10 years, I'm sure. And also that we have to be aware that there are not only benefits, but also problems, and we have to look at them and not neglect them. And with that, I thank you all for participating in this discussion, also to you in the audience and to you on Zoom, and say goodbye and until the next time. Thank you very much.